Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by Warby Parker. Hey, eyeglasses shouldn't be hard to buy, and Warby Parker is here to help. Head on over to warbyparker.com/goodseats and order your free home try-on kit. Right now, 5 pairs of glasses to try on for 5 days with no obligation to buy. Try on the frames, impress your friends, pick the one or ones you like, and send them back. warbyparker.com/goodseats for your free home try-on kit. Here's our show.
Budweiser, a proud sponsor of the Kansas City Royals, would like to take this time to salute our nation's soldiers and veterans. Tonight, we salute Bob Motley. Bob is a rare historical figure in baseball and the military by being the only living umpire from the historic Negro Leagues, and he has also served his country as a United States Marine. After receiving a Purple Heart for his service during World War II, he umpired in the Negro League for the likes of Buck O'Neill, Satchel Paige, Willie Mays, and Ernie Banks. In 2012, he was awarded the nation's highest civilian honor, the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor, for his service during World War II. Bob is a founding member of the Royals Lancers and also serves on the board of directors for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. He is joined tonight by his wife of more than 60 years, Perlene, and his family. Please raise your Budweiser and join us in honoring Bob Motley and all those who keep our nation safe and free.
At least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, friends, how you doing? Let's get this show on the road, shall we? My name's Tim Hanlon, and this is indeed Good Seats Still Available. It's our curious little podcast, our little journey, each and every week, despite all the odds against it, into what used to be in professional sports. I welcome you to the proceedings, and I truly appreciate you honoring me with a little download this week and putting us in your earbuds. We know that you have just on the edge of zillions of choices in podcast land, and I'm tickled pink that you would allow us to hopefully entertain and maybe educate and put a little song in your heart for a little while with this little episode as we continue our journey into the world of forgotten sports, and especially in the world of professional teams that have come and gone for whatever reasons. And we are excited and very happy to finally be getting back to a gigantic topic that we'd love to delve into much deeper. And we are excited at the excuse to do so this week with our guest, Byron Motley, as we talk about his father's career as an umpire, a groundbreaking and simply pioneering umpire in the Negro Leagues, in a book that was published back in 2007 in both printed and in audio form. It is a delight and a revelation. I'm only sorry I hadn't read it until recently. It came out in 2007. It's called Ruling Over Monarchs, Giants, and Stars, Umpiring in the Negro Leagues and Beyond. And it is a work of both love and passion, the Bob Motley story, almost oral history, based on his remembrances of his exploits, calling balls and strikes and then some. In the Negro Leagues of the 1940s and early 1950s, written, compiled, and synthesized through the eyes and ears and the pen of his son, Byron, who is our guest this week. And Byron, a creative Renaissance man in his own right. You may have heard him as a backing vocal for great Arista artists like Barry Manilow and Dionne Warwick and a whole host of others. He has a bunch of albums out. He is a master photographer, a lot of great creative efforts and energies. And of course, well, I don't know, of course, but certainly interestingly, especially for this conversation, as an outgrowth of the book that he co-authored with his dad, who sadly passed away about 2 years ago at the tremendous, well-lived age of 91. Byron is also in the midst, as you'll hear, of putting together what is probably an overdue documentary of substance about the history of the Negro Leagues, and also even a separate project in the works on the life and times of Effa Manley, obviously a towering figure in the management of Negro League baseball. But we're going to sort of get into kind of the beginnings of Byron's efforts and creativity around the Negro Leagues through the story of his father's life as an umpire in the Negro Leagues. And if that wasn't enough of a story, and certainly it was, you heard that clip there from the Kansas City Royals World Series game in 2014. As a matter of fact, that was World Series game number 6. And if you were in the stands, that's what you heard in, I don't know what inning it was. I think it was between the 5th and 6th innings. And I'm not sure that made the national broadcast as well. I'm sure some call out was, I'm sure some people are yelling at their devices now going, of course it was, or, whatever, but feel free to correct us or give us the specifics of that. But Bob Motley was in the crowd, and he was saluted not only for being a pioneer umpire in the Negro Leagues, and obviously anybody involved in the Negro Leagues as a player, as a manager, as an administrator, or as an umpire, more rarely, I guess, is a pioneer just on that level alone. But this is also a man, Bob Motley, who was a war hero. He was awarded the Purple Heart for being injured in combat during World War II. And it's a very interesting story as to how Bob Motley went from being in the Marines and fighting the good fight in a, not so racially integrated military nor country, sadly, but how he stumbled into the world of umpiring baseball is directly related to his war experiences. And we're going to get into all of that, as well as not only some of the great stories and memories and anecdotes that Byron experienced with his dad growing up and in the interview process for this book, but also the years afterwards where Bob continued to fight the good fight, a passion. You will hear nothing short of a passion for baseball, for umpiring, for attaining the highest levels possible, and a dedication to the job, to the effort of being a professional umpire in baseball. It's a great story. It's a wonderful read. And again, it's called Ruling Over Monarchs, Giants, and Stars, Umpiring in the Negro Leagues and Beyond. And you will find a link to that book on our website, of course, at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode, number 131. Oh, my God, 131 episodes. But we'll search up this episode, and while you're listening to it again, you can click on that link and head over to Amazon and purchase yourself a copy, why don't you? And it's a tremendous read. It's great. Some good, interesting photography in there, and the cover alone is worth the price of admission. As you see the colorful Bob Motley calling a play at second base, it's fantastic. You can also, however, get it as an audiobook. And ironically, that's how I first discovered this book, this story, and Byron and Bob's work here. You can, of course, use our little code to get it for yourself via Audible. Go to audibletrial.com/goodseats, and you will get 1 free month of the Audible service, including 1 free audiobook download. And why not use that free audiobook download credit for Ruling Over Monarchs, Giants, and Stars, True Tales of Breaking Barriers, Umpiring Baseball Legends, and Wild Adventures of the Negro Leagues, co-written by Byron Motley, told through the eyes, or actually the original stories by Bob Motley, and is narrated by Richard Allen. I can't think of a better way to get a free audiobook. Try the Audible service, and you can cancel at any time. And if you do so, well, hell, you'll be able to keep that book or whatever other book you decide to download, for God's sakes, on your device as long as your device lives. So it's kind of a no-risk proposition. Matter of fact, it is a no-risk proposition. So why don't you give it a try and use this book, this audiobook by Byron and Bob Motley, to give Audible a try. It's audibletrial.com/goodseats. And just fill in all the information there, and voila, 1 free month and a free audiobook download is yours for the taking. We thank Audible, of course, for their sponsorship of the show. And we thank you for listening, not only hopefully to that audiobook if you download it, thank you and God bless, but also hopefully this great conversation that we had just last week with Byron Motley. And here's our fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. I know I did. Here it comes. Why don't you give our audience a bit of a background about you, first of all, because you're sort of like a creative renaissance man as far as I can tell. And then maybe we can backwardly get into the story of your dad and the book and all that kind of good stuff, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, my background is mostly in music. I grew up in a musical household where my mother played piano almost every night, and we'd sing my dad to sleep, and he'd request us to go sing him to sleep. And so I grew up like that, and I have a master's degree in music, in voice, and I performed. My gosh, I've performed with a lot of artists singing background for people like Dionne Warwick and Barry Manilow and Barbra Streisand and Natalie Cole, Celine Dion, and a few other folks.
Now you've been in a lot of studios, right? With probably a lot of great stories to tell on another podcast, I bet.
Yeah, some interesting stories. Yeah, I've had some variant, not so much about too many artists other than the time I worked for Nina Simone. I was her personal assistant for only 2 weeks, because that's all I could handle. Because she was
the ultimate.
She was a handful. That was back in when I was like 22, 23. So I was pretty naive, and she put me through the ringer. But yeah, that was quite an interesting time. And so I've done that. I'm also been working on a documentary for several years now about the Negro Baseball Leagues, and I've interviewed people like my father, of course, and Buck O'Neill, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, gone as far as interviewing people like Colin Powell, Walter Cronkite, Maya Angelou, just a variety of people, probably well over 100 people I've interviewed for the documentary, and we're looking for a home for it now to hopefully get on the air or get it ready for next year for 2020 for the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. And so that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm also a photographer. I have a published book on Cuba, my second home, I call it now. The book is entitled Embracing Cuba, and it has 8 chapters and over 200 photographs from Cuba. And yes, I've been documenting the country for about 15 years now. I've been going to Cuba as often as possible. So I love the place. And so that's some of the creative things I'm involved in, and some other things as well. But that's kind of quickly in a nutshell of some aspects of my life.
Well, it's clear that that obviously the film. So hopefully, if we don't screw up this interview too much, you'll come back and maybe promote that as well once that's in the distribution shoot.
Absolutely.
But I got to think that a lot of that work either emanated from the book or maybe even before the book, as part of your evolving relationship with your dad, who recently passed, but is, lived a very long and healthy life. I'm curious to kind of sort of, as we circle sort of the start of this, how did you, as you were growing up, right, with all your creative endeavors and artistic interests and college and all that kind of stuff, how did you and when did you kind of sort of stumble across or know about your dad's past, in particular, his baseball exploits?
Well, it's interesting because growing up, my dad really took all that for granted. It was really no big thing, no big deal. I think that's people in general have discovered that people just live their lives and as things unfold, yeah, I did this, and I did that. But it's really not a big deal because it's part of who they are and what they did. So, the fact that he was one of the first Black Marines and he had umpired in the Negro Leagues for several years with these great players, he really just took it for granted. It was just kind of like what he did. But he loved telling stories, and I would guess like every 6 months, maybe once a year, he'd go down memory lane and start, talking about, his days in World War II or his days in the Negro Leagues. And, he'd entertain us. My mother and I would be just on the floor laughing with some of the stories that were just hilarious. But again, it was just like, oh, this is kind of what I did, but no big deal. Didn't realize he was a history maker. He had no concept of that because it was just, he was just this guy from Alabama who just happened to do these things and be around these great players. And it really was not until the Ken Burns documentary back in, what was that, 1996, I believe it was. And Ken Burns actually went to Kansas City, where my dad was living at the time, and interviewed my dad along with Buck O'Neil and several other people. And I remember him calling me and telling me, "You've heard this filmmaker named Ken Burns?" And I said, "Sure." He says, "Well, I just did an interview with him for this documentary he's doing on baseball." I was like, "Oh, okay." But it was, just he did an interview. And then lo and behold, this documentary comes out, and they do 1 hour in the Negro Baseball Leagues, and the story just blows up. I mean, makes a superstar Buck O'Neil and in the sports world, and people for the first time really understood or even knew about the Negro Leagues. But these have been stories I've been hearing all of my life, of course, since the time I was a child. And but none of the players that I knew of, including Buck, before this documentary, really understood the impact they had on the world of baseball. They had no idea, no concept of it. They were just out to play a baseball game, make a little money, and have a whole lot of fun, as I always say. And so when this documentary came out, and people started getting phone calls and wanting more information, that was the first time I know that my dad and these other players really realized that they were a part of history. And I remember several years ago, maybe I think even before the documentary came out, maybe 10 years before the documentary came out, the Ken Burns piece, that we were at dinner one night, my dad, my mom, and a friend of ours, and my dad was telling this friend these stories. And he's like, "Mr. Motley, you should write a book. You should write a book." My dad, "Oh, yeah, whatever." But kind of one ear and out the other. Well, after the Ken Burns piece came out and all this interest started taking place, I'll backtrack just one step. When I saw the documentary, I thought, "Oh, this is really great." But these are not the stories I heard growing up as a kid. This is a nice overview of what the Negro Leagues were. I said, but there's so many more stories. There's my father's stories that would have really made this documentary pop. And that's when I first got the inkling that somebody needs to do a documentary about the Negro Baseball Leagues. I mean, a complete, full-on documentary. 1 hour, the Ken Burns did. It's great, but it's not enough. So about 4 or 5 years later, I was having dinner with a friend of mine in New York, and I was telling him my father's stories. He was a filmmaker, and I thought, well, maybe he's the guy to do this. When I finished telling him my father's stories, he said, as much as I love this and I'm entertained by this, is that I'm not the person to do this film. He says, "You are." Well, I'd never done a film in my life. I never even thought about doing a film. And so several years later, I thought, well, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should do this. And I started embarking on the journey of interviewing players, former players, widows, children, heads of state like Colin Powell, and putting together this documentary, which I said, like I said, hopefully will come out sometime in 2020. Did it answer some of your question? I kind of rambled on there.
So it took that opus by Ken Burns, and he's got another one coming up with country music, I hear, in a couple of weeks. It seems to me that seemed to be like
that was the turning point for everybody.
Everybody
again,
but including you,
everybody,
because you went back to what I guess were just personal stories and just family, conversations that all of a sudden said, "Wait a minute, treasure trove here."
Yeah. I mean, this is across the board. This is from discussions with a lot of the former players. Nobody really gave it a thought until the Ken Burns piece. Now, I will say that the Negro League Baseball Museum was founded in 1997, a year after the Ken Burns piece, but that had been in the works for several years to get that museum up and going. And they had a small storefront across the street from where it is now that actually my father and Buck O'Neil helped start. They paid for it, basically. So that was already in the motion for that. But again, nationally and really in the consciousness of everybody, they didn't realize what they had created back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. It just was a baseball game for them. But things kind of came together around 1996, 97, and the Ken Burns really helped to propel that museum forward and really the history and legacy of what the Negro Leagues has become.
So, all right. So the light bulb goes off. How do you, I guess, for lack of a better word, how do you re-engage with your dad? I'm not even speaking about whatever the relationship was. I assume there was some level of closeness of the relationship generally, but how do you now, with that sort of framing in mind, how do you go back and say, hey, Dad, how do we maybe more memorialize some of these great stories into the real history or the better or more full-flavored history of the Negro Leagues, maybe through your eyes and then some?
Yeah, well, my dad and I always had a very close relationship, so that was great. And when the Kim Burns piece came out a couple of years later, and my dad's doing interviews for people, and there's more interest, I said to my dad, you really should probably think about doing a book. So I contacted 3 of the top Negro League historians at that time, and I said, the players get all the recognition, the umpire is always forgotten about. And somebody needs to write a book about my dad. I said, would you be willing to write the book about my dad? They all 3 were busy with other projects, focused on the players. So nobody wanted to do it because, the umpires, who cares about the umpire, right? Most people hate the umpire anyway. So I woke up one day and I thought, you know what? If nobody's going to write this book for him, I'm going to write it. So I called him up. I've never written a book in my life. Never even thought about writing a book in my life. I think I even failed English at one point. My teacher, she would have just, Mrs. Williams, may she rest in peace. If she knew that I had written 2 books now and working on the 3rd, she's probably dancing up in heaven thinking about it right now. Anyway, so I contacted my dad and said, let's think about, doing something. And then I was at a Negro League conference. I think I was in Cleveland, like in 2006. And it kind of been in my mind to maybe do something. I was at this conference, and a publisher, I won't name the publisher because I did end up going with them, approached me at that conference and said, hey, would you be interested in writing a book about your dad, out of the clear blue? And I said, well, yeah, funny you should mention that, because my dad and I have been talking about maybe doing something. And so he says, well, our publishing company would definitely do it. We would love to do it. And so I said, okay. So I talked to my dad about it. And he says, okay, well, I'll tell you the stories and, you write it. I said, okay. So we started working on it and finished a draft, and I sent it up to the publisher. And I thought, well, if they're interested in it, there's got to be other publishers who are interested in it. So I started shopping around and actually went with another publishing company, which was called Sports Publishing at the time. They were based out of Champaign, Illinois. And they made a better offer, so it went with them. And they published a book in 2007. And then they actually went out of business in 2012. But the publishing company who took over Sports Publishing is Skyhorse Publishing. And they reprinted the book, renamed it, made an ebook out of it, because they really believed in it. So the book has had two publishings. It's still available through Skyhorse as an ebook and also as a printed hardcover, which is interesting that when it first came out, it was a softback through Sports Publishing, and then Skyhorse made it into a hardback, which is usually the opposite way around. But if you are interested in getting the book, make sure you get the hardback version, because it's more of the recent version. It has some updated information since 2007. So the 2012 version has more updated history with my dad's with his history.
Well, so I think even the premise is unique, right? Because you kind of mentioned, I think, two of the major sort of components of why it's different, right? One is, to be fair, most of the works, even still today, around the Negro Leagues are some great books out there, but a lot of them are very deep and research driven, and almost sort of along the lines of theses, and master's degree and PhD dissertations and whatnot. And sure, all that documentation really important. There's always new bits and pieces sort of being unearthed, but can also be very dry, right? And the other issue is that to your point earlier, right? Players, certainly, maybe administrators like the Effa Manleys. We've had a conversation about her and her life, of course, very seminal in the history of as a female, as an African American, as a baseball executive, all that kind of stuff. But through the lens of an umpire, right? Even in the quote unquote major leagues, right? The idea of the umpire's stories is still a relative rarity. So
I think there's only been one or two in the majors. I think only one or two in the majors about
right.
the
so
umpires.
I can see I can see where this becomes a very interesting lens on sort of two different levels. So let me ask you this: how did your dad even become an umpire in the first place? Right, here's a guy who's in the Marines. He's fought in World War II. He wins the Purple Heart, for God's sakes, serving his country, and not in the most, shall we say, racially harmonious times. How does he get into baseball and umpiring at that?
Well, he got into umpire because he was a terrible baseball player.
Those who can't play umpire, is that it?
Yeah, I guess so. But he was not very good. He thought he was, and he tried out for the Cleveland Buckeyes, and he was like, 17 or 18. Had never played in a game in his life. Just decided, I'm going to be a pitcher. I'm going to pitch for the Cleveland Buckeyes in the Negro Leagues. Had never really played before, but loved baseball. And went out and tried out for this team and promised that he could pitch. And back then, if you said you could do it, you got a shot. So he pitched for not even one inning for the Cleveland Buckeyes in his adopted home of Dayton, Ohio, where he moved when he was, like I said, 16 or 17 years old. And he did okay at the tryout early that morning, but when it came to game time, he said that everything he threw up to the plate was either a base hit or a home run. And he said finally the skipper came running out of the dugout towards him, ready to strangle him. And my father said he ran past him farther with his uniform on before the umpire, before the manager could get him, and he ran out of the ball field with his uniform on and never looked back. Because he had really embarrassed himself. And but like I say, he still loved the game. And when he got injured in World War II, he was in the Marine Hospital, and you heard a baseball game going on off in the distance by some other soldiers who were either on break or who had been injured themselves. And so he said he hobbled down there on his crutches and to watch, and when they saw him, they said, "Hey, Motley, we need an umpire. Can you umpire?" He said, "Yeah, sure, I can do it." My father was the type of person that you said, "Can you?" It was always yes. There was never hesitation. His theme was, you never take no for an answer, and get an opportunity, you go for it. And so he had never umpired before, but he knew what the duties of an umpire were, obviously. And that was his first game, umpiring there for these Marines. And he said he loved it. He found his true calling, because he liked to be in control anyway. And he realized that being the umpire, although the catcher and the pitcher thinks they're in control of the game, no. The umpire is the one who controls every aspect of the game. You stop and think about it, and it's so true. You cannot play a game, a real legit game, without having the umpire there. So he found that was his passion. He just fell in love with it. He got sent back in the front lines when he came back from umpiring that game. The nurse said, I thought you were injured, Motley. He says, "Well, yeah, I am." And he said the next day he was back in the front line. She reported him. He had to go back serving back on the front lines. But so that's how he discovered his passion for umpiring. And then when he moved to Kansas City after being discharged, honorably discharged with his Purple Heart, he moved to Kansas City because he had a sister living there, and he heard about the Kansas City Monarchs, who were playing a stone's throw from her house, like 2 blocks away from her house is where the stadium was, the old Mulebach Stadium. I think it was called Mulebach Stadium. And so he wandered up there one day. He had had bought umpire gear and all that sort of thing. He's been umpiring kind of locally there in Kansas City, some sandlot games. And so he went to, on a Sunday, all the league games were on Sundays in Kansas City at the stadium there. So he said he showed up one Sunday and he found out where the umpires were going in. He said he got there early in the morning because he didn't know what time they were going to show up. The game was like at 12 o'clock or 1. He said he was at the stadium by like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, just waiting with his umpire gear, sitting outside where the umpires would have to go in. So he's waiting, and he sees these guys show up, and he recognizes that they must be the umpires and introduces himself. He says, I want to umpire with you guys. I'm an umpire. And I'm like, kid, get out of here. You don't know anything about umpiring. Kid, get. Because he was like, at the time, he was maybe 19, 20, 21 at the most.
He's got to be making a living somehow too, though, right? I mean, this can't.
Oh yeah, he was working at General Motors at the time. Yeah, he worked there for 37 years, so he was working there. And so the umpires turned him down. Said, you're a kid, you don't know anything about umpiring, get out of here. Because like he said, at the time he was like in his early 20s, and all these guys were in their 40s and 50s. They were old to him. And so he said every week, just when the Monarchs were playing, he would show right back up at the same spot every Sunday with his umpiring gear, waiting for the chance to umpire. Every week they would say, get out of here. Nope, we don't need you. Wasting your time. And one of the umpires was a guy named Frank Duncan, who was a former catcher with the Monarchs. Great player, Hall of Fame level player. Was one of the umpires now because he retired from playing. And so, like in the 5th or 6th try, when he's hoping to get a break, as he's waiting outside the stadium, one Sunday the umpires show up and Frank Duncan's knees were giving out. So Frank says, well, you know what? My knees aren't quite up to the. Come on. You umpire third base today. And the rest is history. He said that's all he wanted was that first break to get on the field. And you have to remember back then, it wasn't like, if they found somebody they thought was a good enough player, they go to the player's home, ask for the parents' permission, and the kid would go from school right there. It wouldn't be, okay, come back in a week or two. You would get on the bus and travel. You would go, if the parents gave permission. And so, it wasn't so odd that my father got that chance that one Sunday, to be invited. Okay, come on, just umpire one game and, just get this kid, this little, just give him this chance and maybe he'll get out of here. That's probably what they're thinking. And, but he said he did a great job and they liked him and they say, hey, come back again next week, come on back and help us again. And then he said that first season, he just kept moving around the bases. And finally, he said when he finally got, because they weren't going to let him umpire behind home plate for a while, but when he finally got behind home plate, he said that's all he needed. And he put on a show for the fans. He was, loud and boisterous. And he wouldn't just call a strike. He would, he would scream out so the entire stadium could hear him. Because he wanted to prove that he could be on par with these veterans who were all former players. He was the only one who was not a former player. These are all former players with the Monarchs. And then after a couple of years, he became the chief umpire in the leagues and would travel around the country with mostly the Monarchs and Birmingham Black Barons and Memphis Red Sox. And, became the chief umpire in the league. And created his own history. He made his own history. Just made it. He took his own job is basically what he did. Because most people after being turned down that first time, the big guys say, we don't need you, don't come around us anymore. Most people wouldn't go back. He was persistent and went back and back and back until he got that yes, and he never looked back. And now he has a statue in the Negro League Baseball Museum. So that shows you what persistence can do.
All right, we'll be back with our conversation in just a moment. But first, a message from our friends at Warby Parker. I must tell you, friends, I cannot stand the process of getting eyeglasses. It's something that I've luckily avoided for most of my adult life, but it's unavoidable now. And the process of going into a store, meeting an optician, trying on frames, not knowing what the hell I'm doing, and having no fashion sense whatsoever, all of the whole process, completely intimidating. And that's why I was attracted to Warby Parker in the first place. And you can do what I did and avoid the hassles and the embarrassment and just the sheer frustration of the process by trying on the frames at home. All you got to do is go to warbyparker.com/goodseats and order your free home try-on package. What do you get? You get 5 pairs of glasses, I think is the appropriate English way to say that. And you get to try them on for 5 days for free with no obligation. And you try them on for your friends, your family, your loved ones, whomever, and see if they like what you think you might like. Obviously, you can see what kind of frames you like by going online first, by answering a few questions and choosing some of the frames you think you might enjoy the most. They come to you in a prepaid and return shipping situation there. You try them on, and I will tell you, it worked well for me. I tried on 5 pair at home with my wife and 2 daughters. The 4 first ones I tried on, they could not stand. I thought the first 2 or 3 actually looked pretty darn good, but they said no, and they win. That 5th pair, however, oh boy, seems like I hit the jackpot. And that's the one we went with, and we sent it back in with my prescription, and voila, about a week later, I got great sunglasses. Well, that's next, but I got great eyeglasses from Warby Parker, and the price, you can't beat it. There's no middleman, shall we say. Great frames, great styles, and the process could not be easier. Again, for you, our listeners, you can do the same thing. Head over to warbyparker.com/goodseats, take the quiz, get your 5 eye-frame glasses situation set up for you, have them sent to you, and enjoy the process as I did. Fear no more the process of getting great prescription glasses. warbyparker.com/goodseats. Try them out. You will love them, as I have and still do. All right, let's go back to our conversation. Here it comes. So what do you think drove your dad to stick with the umpiring thing and then become such a showman? Because clearly he became almost a mini star attraction himself, along with the players.
Oh, he was, yeah. Right? Yeah, he absolutely was. I've talked to players, and one former widow of a player who, they told me how entertaining he was. They said, your dad was just, he'd come out wearing his polished Stacey Adams shoes. He'd be ready. He loved that control. He loved being, when he was he said umpiring the bases is okay, but to be behind home plate, he said to call a ball and strike, he says, just get all over you, just feel it all in your bones. I can hear him saying it right now, how it just, he said he'd rather umpire a ball game than eat a meal. And he was passionate about it. He just loved it. It was his calling. He found his purpose, so to speak, from being injured from being injured when he got shot in the toe in World War II. Who would ever thunk that you'd find your calling and your passion when you're hobbling around with your big toe shot off?
It's also interesting timing too, because this we're talking about, I guess, the late 40s, early 50s, right?
Late 40s, yeah.
Okay, so that's also, though, strangely, the time when the Negro Leagues were sort of waning, right? To Jackie Robinson obviously becoming the first major league player to, you will, cross the barriers and integrate in the major leagues and stuff. So arguably it was the beginning sort of a arguably slow kind of trailing off of the Negro League. So it sounds like your dad certainly made the most of the opportunity for a bunch of years. I got to think, though, he was also either in the back or maybe in the forefront of his mind, maybe looking even at a bigger prize about sort of going to the big show, if and when all of that sort of
absolutely. That was his ultimate goal, was to get to the bigs. And he was the first black to go to umpire school. Back then, the major leagues were stricter than they were, obviously, than the Negro Leagues. At the Negro Leagues, you could show up and umpire a game, but then in the major leagues, you had to prove your worth And no major league umpire had gone to the major leagues without going to umpire school first. So my father, starting in the late 40s, tried to go to umpire school, but because of segregation, they weren't allowing any black umpires into any umpire school in the country, and there weren't that many of them anyway. I think there was 2 or 3. But he would write to them every year and ask for permission to come to school, and every year was no. And as he explained it, he said, especially in Florida, the school he really wanted to go to was the Al Summers school, which is now the Harry Wendelstedt. I believe that's how you say his name.
Yeah, sure.
Umpire.
Very famous umpire, sure.
Yeah, it's his school now. But yeah, my father said he wrote to them every year for like 10 years, and they have said, nope, we don't allow blacks.
Now,
finally,
no, I said that for a second. So we'll get to the punchline in a second. But so, okay, obviously he's persistent. We've already proven that he doesn't take no for an answer. But 10 years of that, number one's got to sort of get to your psyche. Number two,
oh, absolutely.
But number two, it's again hindsight. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just going back and so eyebrow raising for all this stuff. The sport itself is in the midst of integration, right? Players are by that time starting to really fully make the jump into Major League Baseball. The Negro Leagues are in decline. They don't, the segregation thing is waning away, thankfully. But why not on the umpiring side? What do you think that was? I think because the umpire is in control. That's the subconscious. That's the subconscious thread of that. And you have to remember the first black umpire. Okay, so Jackie Robinson, 1947, broke the color barrier. The first black coach was Buck O'Neill in 1960. That's 13 years after Jackie Robinson. The first black umpire wasn't until 20 years after Jackie Robinson, and that was Emmett Ashford. So you're talking about 20 years after Jackie Robinson before they allow an umpire. And then the first black manager comes along, 1975 was it? With, was it Frank Robinson, 1975? Am I correct in that? And then even ownership, right, which is even longer still, right? So
well, still. I mean, you got Max Johnson with 1%. I mean, whatever he has, 2%, whatever, a low percentage. But yeah, so you're looking at 20 years after Jackie Robinson that they allow one umpire. One. And then another one doesn't come along for another 20 years, 10, 20, 30 years, something like that. Not 30, but another 10, at least another 10 to 15 years. So yeah, that was a very slow process to integrate the first black umpire. Now, my father thought that he would be it. He really wanted to be. He kept pressing on. He made it to the Pacific Coast League and umpired with Emmett Ashford in the Pacific Coast League for a few years. And then I think my father says because he was in the Midwest in Missouri and Emmett Ashford was on the coast in California, and had been umpiring in the Pacific Coast League longer than my father. He was maybe 20 years older than my father. So he was older and had paid more dues, I guess you could say, and was a damn good umpire. My father said he said he was amazing. And my father said that when they umpired together my father said he was already outrageous as an umpire. He said, but when he umpired with Emmett Ashford, he says Emmett was even crazier than he was, even more flamboyant. Matter of fact, he said the first game they umpired together, I think it was in either San Diego or somewhere. He said my father said that Emmett was the home plate umpire. He says they walked out to the field, the four umpiring crew. This is in the Pacific Coast, like the minor leagues. The majors would never allow this. He said they walked out to the field, got to home plate. Emmett took his breast protection and his face mask and put them down on the ground and took off on a dead shot running towards center field wall as fast as he could. And he said, what the hell is he doing? Didn't say a word. Takes off running, gets to the center field wall, turns a flip, runs back in. The crowd is going crazy because they knew what to expect. My father didn't know if he was going to do this. Runs full steam toward home plate and slides into home. That was his play ball.
That's fantastic. That's a show. That's a show right there, right? But obviously
that's a show.
A little flair,
right?
Show. I'm assuming he had some Negro League experience as well, right?
Well, no, because Emmett never umpired in the Negro Leagues. He was in California, and there were so he only umpired basically in integrated ball in California. So, and that may have been another reason why he was chosen to be the first also, because he had been, like Jackie Robinson, had been more in that integrated kind of community for longer than my dad had been. But yeah, that was how flamboyant and what a showmanship, Emmett had. My father said, he said, when I saw him do that, I said, my God, I got to step up my game. I got to really show out now. So they were, friendly, but they were, competitively friendly, trying to one up each other while in the Pacific Coast League. But when Emmett got to the majors, they made him tone it down. He's still pretty flamboyant for major league umpire at that time. But he toned down his act quite a bit. The majors would not have they still wouldn't put up with an umpire running full steam and turning a flip and then coming and sliding into home plate. Can you imagine? They probably fine him his entire yearly salary.
Well, there's a great picture on the cover of your book, right? Of your dad. It looks like almost 6 feet in the air, jumping up, and. So was that indicative of your dad's flair and style? What kind of things, were there any signature moves that he was known for in his days, both in the Negro Leagues and afterwards with PCL, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, the Negro Leagues were all showmanship anyway. I shouldn't say anyway, but a lot of the players did extra things to entertain the fans. So my father said that he was umpiring first base, and when his style really started to develop, he was umpiring first base, and he kind of kicked up his leg a little bit to call somebody out. And a woman in the stands said, "Do it pretty for me, baby." And he said he heard her say it, and he looked over, he said she was kind of cute. He said, so the next time I got a close play, and I kicked my leg up a little bit higher. And the next time a little bit higher. He said, and the more I did that, the more the fans just went crazy. And so that is what really developed his style, was when that woman said, "Do it pretty for me, baby." He was trying to get the girl and trying to show off. So that's how he started.
Sounds like every entertainer I ever knew that became successful. It was always about the women, it seems.
Yep. So he loved that. So he started jumping up in the air and doing almost turning the somersault if he had to. And there's another photograph of him where he's down on his knees, practically doing the splits, calling a runner safe. So he just did all kind of things just to have fun and to keep the crowd going.
So what was it in '57 that, from his perspective, his thought process, what was it that it happened in '57 that enabled him to finally get into this umpiring school he had longed for?
Yeah, I think they just began to kind of relax the laws, the rules. And so off he went in 1957. He said he couldn't believe it when he got the phone call from Al Summers himself and said, I think it's time, you've been persistent, come on down here, but I'm not making any promises, and you have to be careful because, this is the South, and my father's from the South. I've dealt with the South. I can deal with that. I just want the opportunity to umpire. So he drove down there and almost got hung on his, going through Meridian, Mississippi. They tried to lynch him there when he's just minding his own business, trying to drive through town at night. And he said he got to umpire school that first day in Daytona Beach. He was, nervous. Actually got there in the evening. And he said he went up to I guess they call it the barracks or whatever, where the guys were staying. And he said this little crotchety old man was behind the counter. And my father said, I'm Bob Motley here to check in. And the guy literally threw the key at him, his room key. Said, your room's down the hall. And my father's like, oh shoot, this is not going to work out, because I might have to go back home. He said, if Al Summers treats me like this guy treated me tonight, he says, I'm out of here. He said, I'm not dealing with this. And the next day they all gathered to go out in the field. He says, Al Summers came up and gave him a big hug and welcomed him. And then said that was all he needed to know that this is where he belonged. And he stayed and graduated top of his class. He was number one. And after the season, after the class ended, usually all of the top umpires who were the top in their class, if they scored well in the field and scored well in the exams, all of those umpires, all the ones below him, the top 4 or 5, they all got assigned to like double A or single D. They got assigned somewhere. My father was sent home. Al Summers said, I've tried to get you placed somewhere in organized ball, but nobody's taking a black umpire. So I'm sorry, go home and I'll call you if I get a call. Somebody will use you, but I've tried, but there's nothing I can do. Nobody will take a black umpire. So my father drove all the way back from Florida back to Missouri, went back to work at General Motors, and he said that came March of the next year, he says, I'm going to go back to umpire school and do the graduate course. So he called Al Summers, said, can I come back and take the advanced course? Al Summers said, come on back, send your money in. Of course, he wanted the money. He said, come on back and love to have you back. Went back there again, 1958. Again, top of this class. After the school was over, Summers called him to the office of Motley. Again, I tried. I can't get you placed anywhere. He says, go on home. If I get a call, I'll call you. Same old song and dance. And my father said every time the phone would ring, he'd run to the phone. Or my mother would run to the phone, hoping it would be Al Summers calling, with a placement somewhere. And he said finally in August of 1959, he said he had really kind of threw it out of his mind. He said the phone rang and it was Al Summers, and he says, I got an assignment for you. They want you at AAA. It was the first time that any umpire, white, black, green, yellow, whatever, had gone from umpire school directly to AAA. First time ever. Not even Emmett Ashford got that honor. So that shows you how good my father was, and the fact that Al Summers chose him himself. Matter of fact, Al Summers had gotten injured, and my father replaced him. Al Summers, I'm just speculating that Al Summers would probably say, I can't do it, but this is the umpire I want to do it, and you guys got to give him a chance. So my father became the second black to umpire in AAA. Emmett Ashford was there already. So he spent a couple of years in AAA and then decided, he knew that the break was not going to come. He just felt like the break is not going to come soon enough that I need. And I have a family to support. I can't just keep living on this, on a dream that someday they're going to see the light and let us in. So he finally left the AAA after 2 or 3 years, and that was like the early 1960s. And like I said, it wasn't until 1967 that Emmett Ashford finally got into the majors. And then there's an article that Emmett he was interviewed for Sporting News, where he's talking about we need more black umpires in the majors. And the guy that needs to be up here with me is Bob Motley. And that article was in, I believe, the late 1960s, early. I used to have it. I actually gave it to his daughter, to Emmett Ashford's daughter, the copy I had, because she didn't have very much about her father, so I shared that with her. But so that's kind of in a nutshell how that transitioned to AAA, and then like I said, he just decided it was not in for the long haul. To hope that they were going to choose a second black umpire after Emmett, and they didn't until late until the 1980s, I believe.
Well, look, I've listened to some of the interviews that your dad did in the promotion for this book about 12, 13 years ago, and he doesn't strike me as a bitter person. Maybe older age sort of softened that at time, but I can't imagine you can't be a human being and not be crushed when
I'm glad you brought that up, because what's astonishing about my dad and all of these former Negro League players, to a man, and the one woman who was still living before she passed away a couple years ago, to a man and that one woman, not one single one of them had an ounce of bitterness about what happened. Not one of them. And it has nothing to do with old age. It has nothing to do with, like most of the time, we knew our place back then. It was just the way things were. They accepted the world for what it was. They knew that they weren't going to get certain things. They knew they weren't going to be allowed certain places. So okay, that's what I'm going to enjoy myself over here then. You guys can have all that. I'm going to enjoy myself over here. I'm going to enjoy what I do have. And so these guys were not bitter. My father I never heard him say anything negative about, I could have done that. I should have been. He never said. He knew how good he was. He knew he should have been in the majors. He knew that. But, he said it's a different time, the way it was. I mean, Buck O'Neil said the same thing. He has a great quote that says, the quote that says something like, I wasn't born too early. I was right on time. It's just, they just knew their place. It's astonishing. I mean, if I don't get my way on a day-to-day basis, I'm like ready to throw things at the wall, And these guys are like, okay, well, it's all right. I've got this and I got that. That's fine. That's fine by me.
Well, that said, though, it's pretty clear in what you've just described and the pieces that I've read from the book thus far. It seemed like he had some pretty interesting times and some fun doing it, right? And I got to think, in some respects, especially given he's married with a family and stuff, right? He still has some strong elements of being able to at least live quite a bit of that dream, if not sort of the ultimate prize, right?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that he got any kind of notoriety at all, to him was like, what? They're doing this for me? He just was very humble about it and would almost be embarrassed about it. And we were the last time he was out here visiting me in LA, I got the Dodgers to honor him, and it's like a few weeks before he passed away. So he's had a little dementia going on, not terribly, but he kept looking at me saying, "Why are they? Is this all for me?" And I said, "Yes, it's for you." But what did I do? I said, "Come on, you know what you did." He kind of like chuckle and laugh, and I said, "You're a legend, right?" "Oh, I'm just a small boy from Missouri, from Alabama. No, I'm just a small boy from Alabama." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "But it's all this. They're doing this for you." He said, "Oh." He was really tickled by it, and surprised, and of course honored by it. And it's just a different mindset for those guys back then. And I would venture to say that to be the fact with all of them, at least the ones I've met. And I've met well over, a lot of them passed on now, but I've met well over 100 former players that played in the Negro Leagues. And they were all just as humble and sweet and just as, if you gave them a compliment, their eyes would light up. It's like, "Oh my God, you're talking about me? Oh yeah, I did do that, didn't I?" It's a different thing. It's a different thing. It's amazing. It's humbling.
Yeah, as your dad unfolded his story for you, were there any standout names and or teams that kept coming up that he sort of kind of went to and said best of the best or amazingness and stories and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. And what was interesting about how growing up, he would tell these stories. I kind of locked all this stuff away in my mind. And so when it came down to writing the book with him, I was like, "Well, tell me about this again." He says, "How do you remember that?" And I said, "Well, you told me that years ago." He said, "Well, how do you remember that?" I said, "I don't know." But for some reason, his stories really got locked in my mind. So I reminded him of a lot of things that he had totally forgotten about. But his all-time favorite player, and he did not have favorites when it came to ball players. I mean, he was a typical umpire to the day he died. I mean, he loved certain players, but he would never say he'd never said I have a favorite, because he has to be impartial as an umpire. Very impartial. Now, he did say that the player that he enjoyed watching the most, he wouldn't say his favorite, the one he enjoyed watching the most was Willard Brown, who played with the Monarchs and also the St. Louis Browns, I believe. And he said he really enjoyed watching him because he said he would kind of mosey up to the plate like he could barely move, like he was 90 years old. He said he hit that ball, he'd run around the bases like a jackrabbit. The fastest man I ever saw. He said, but yet he'd walk around like he wasn't going to be able to make it across the street. So he loved Willard Brown, loved watching him, and he always said that was his favorite. He also enjoyed calling balls and strikes on Satchel Paige, of course. And at that point in time, I think Satchel was a little bit older, and he says, so Hilton Smith, who was a great pitcher for the Monarchs, he said he was pretty phenomenal also. But my father said that sometimes he would call a ball when Satchel thought it was a strike, and Satchel would kind of mouth off my dad, and my dad said, my dad's a former Marine, so he didn't take any crap off anybody. So he says when he would try to give me some lip, he said, I'll just take off my face mask and give him a look. Like, don't try me because I'll yank you out of this ball game. And so sometimes my dad would call a ball or something, and Satchel thought it was a strike. He said, "You missed one, and my dad took off his face. I ain't missed nothing. What you got to say about it? So he would stand up to Satchel Paige, And I love the story that I don't know if you know the story about my dad and Buck O'Neill.
No, aside from the fact that they were both featured in the Burns opus, baseball.
Okay, yeah, this is one story that Ken Burns really should have told in the feature. Buck O'Neill in his entire 70-year career had only been thrown out of a baseball game one time in 70 years, and my father is one who threw him out of the baseball game. They had a disagreement over a play. Buck said it was infield fly rule. My dad said it was a close call to the plate. I tend to think it was that Buck was right, what it was. And so anyway, they had this argument, and I guess Buck said the magic word, probably called him a no good blind MF or whatever. So my father said, throw him out of the baseball game. You're gone. You're out of here. So I don't want to see you anywhere. When I say you're out, that means you're out of the stadium. I don't want to look down the dugout and see you nowhere. Because back then they didn't really have good facilities and stuff like that. Some of those stadiums. So they were playing in, I believe it was Florida. And after the game was over, my father realized, oh shit, I ain't got no place to stay. I don't have a room in the house. I don't have anything. So he had to put his tail between his legs and went to Buck and said, "Hey, Buck, I don't have a place to stay tonight." Buck said, "No problem, Motley. You stay in my room." That's the kind of guy Buck was. Let bygones be bygones. Just stay in my room. So the father said, got to the hotel, a little small, dinky, black-owned hotel, and got the key. Got there before Buck did. Got the key, went to the room. There's one little tiny bed in the room. One tiny bed in the room. He's like, oh, hell. So he slept on one side of the bed that night, and Buck slept on the other, in the same bed, at the same night after my father had thrown him out of the baseball game.
Well, if that's not a scene from a movie, I don't know what would be.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah. He said the next morning, he said, I got up as early as I could and got the hell out of there. He said, but you know what? He says, Buck and I never talked about that one time since that happened. But they actually did go on an interview. They did an interview with MLB Radio several years ago, and they talked about that, what had happened that evening. And they were still arguing about if it was a close play at the plate or the infield fly rule. Hilarious.
Well, it also speaks to, I think, and this is my inference, but maybe you heard it more explicitly from your dad, that it seems to me like there was, despite the odds, despite the challenges of being African American at that time, regardless if you're a baseball player or not, for God's sakes, that there was a sort of a level of camaraderie, frankly, maybe born out of necessity, but just simply a survival mechanism in some respects. But it does seem like that there was plenty of good-naturedness along the way, despite some of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, but my dad had to travel on the bus with the ball teams, with the players, because back then, the players didn't, the leagues weren't going to pay for the umpire to travel on his own, so he had to travel from town to town on the bus with the ball players. And he does talk about in the book, chronicle about the time that one of the players, Hank Bayless, tried to kill my father on the bus because my father had he didn't agree with the call my father had made, and they were on a bus somewhere in the South, and my father said he looked up middle of the night, and there's Hank Bayless over him with a big old butcher knife going to stab him. And he said Buck O'Neill saved his life that night, and basically told Hank Bayless, if you harm that umpire, he says you're a fool, and you'll never play in this league again, and you'll be in jail, and put that knife down. And my father said they fought pretty good. And my father also said that he would always sit in the back of the bus, the very last of the bus, last row of the bus, just to keep an eye on the players to make sure they weren't going to try any funny business. He said he always kept his face mask in his hand as his weapon to use in case he got into an altercation. And he said that face mask came in handy that night when Hank Bayless was trying to kill him. And I actually met Hank Bayless's daughter about 10 years ago at an event in Kansas City, and was asking her about if she had heard that story. But she said, no. So I told her, she was cracking up. She said, that sounds like my dad. My father would cut anybody. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe that. But yeah, so he took his life in his hands, traveling with the teams. And he said from the fans, he said that the fans were worse than the players. If they felt you had made a bad call, because they'd come looking for you after the game. They were going to kill the umpire, literally. He said one time he came sneaking out of the stadium somewhere, and I think we write about this in the book too. Sneaking out of the stadium, and somebody says, "Hey, aren't you that umpire?" And my father said, "No, I'm looking for him too. Where is he? So they go on hunting. He's hunting with these people looking for the umpire, and he's actually the umpire because they were going to kill him, or at least beat him up real good. And he said that the female fans were a lot worse than the men fans. The females he said they would cut you. He said they took the game really to heart. They were not messing around. They loved their baseball team. He said so he was more leery of the women because he said no telling what they would do to you. But yeah. So it was competitive from a fan level all the way down to the players. So they weren't messing around back then.
I think it's amazing because look, here's a job, a role, right, which frankly, is kind of thankless, right? Because you're making balls and strikes and calling.
Oh, very, yeah. And
you're always going to upset somebody. There's always somebody winning, somebody losing. Plus, then you layer in the more serious challenges, and that would probably defeat anybody. Trying to become a professional umpire and not getting into school, and his the war stuff, and being in a racially divided and ignorant in many cases country that in many respects wouldn't even still couldn't for years even figure out a way to thank African Americans who served during the war, right? So it's a really interesting testament, this story of your dad, on a number of different levels, not just the fact he was an umpire in the Negro Leagues, but the whole sort of composition of him as a guy, right, is, it's not like many people would want to continue to do this and pursue it, right? There's not like a path to riches here. He must have really had some, deep passion and a level of, I don't know, I guess order or seriousness.
Yeah, he really loved it. Matter of fact, I told you he would say this often. Matter of fact, he said this the last time he was at Dodger Stadium right before he passed away. He said they were interviewing him. They asked him about what umpiring meant to him. He said it again. He says, I'd rather skip a meal. To umpire a baseball game. That's what he loved. He said, he said, don't feed me. Let me umpire. That was what he loved to do.
All right, let me ask you one last question. We'll round it out, and then I'll let you promote in earnest both the book and everything else. So, entering into this this dialogue with your father in the preparation and the creation of this book. What did you think you knew about him? Or frankly, what did you sort of learn in that process that truly surprised you? I mean, obviously you grew up with his stories and whatnot, but if you can kind of just encapsulate it all, what besides him as a man and all these interesting stories, I mean, was there any sort of like major revelation that sort of came out of this, or that you would never have guessed or thought about prior to going through this effort?
Yes. His sense of humor. I didn't realize it was so funny. I didn't realize this until much later, because he was such a disciplinarian growing up. He was making sure we stay on the right path. Do this, do that. He was just a disciplinarian. So he wasn't very much fun to be around, I didn't think, growing up. Because, it asked permission for that, I had to ask permission for this. But when I got older, it really wasn't until maybe 20 years ago when I realized this man is hilarious. And the life of the party. I always thought that my mother was the life of the party and really the fun one, and she was great. But, he had a different sensibility, a different level of playfulness. And don't let him find your weak spot. You being a stranger to him, and he finds your weak spot, he drill you on that to the point where you'd be like, oh my God, I gotta get away from this man, because he loved to tease people. A cousin of his, I thought about this the other day. He had a cousin, actually my mother's cousin. Every single time he saw her, she'd say, "Hi, Bob, how are you?" He'd say, "Who are you?" And he would act like he didn't remember her from, and this is when I was a little kid. I thought, my God, that was hilarious. And he would have her almost in tears, and he would act like he didn't know who she was. And then we get in the car, and he'd laugh. I got her again. So he had a really just a wry and playful and mischievous sense of humor. And so in the process of doing this book together, when he would tell me certain stories, he would start laughing before he even get the story out. He'd laugh for 5 minutes before he could settle down to tell me the story, recalling certain things. So I think it was just this playful sense of humor, which I really, really honor now.
That's interesting, because given the life, right? If you look at it from an outsider, right? Not the easiest path, and chosen or otherwise, right? All the more reason why this book is just, frankly, just a joy. I'm sorry that I only
thank you.
Years after its initial publishing, but hopefully our little audience here, actually, I'd say not so little anymore, believe it or not, will hopefully discover it if they haven't already put it on their bookshelf or listened to it. Why don't you give us a little bit of a promotion for it, and importantly as well, what you think is going to happen with what you hope to have happen with the documentary, as well as your other exploits outside of Negro League baseball.
Well, just keep doing some great things and making my own history here, and making some good entertainment showcases for people to enjoy through my music and through my filmmaking. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, actually, we'll have some good news on the front with the documentary. We're talking to some people now about that again. So yeah, just get this documentary completed. I'm also working on a feature film about F.A. Manley that Penny Marshall, my friend, the late Penny Marshall, who directed A League of Their Own and a lot of other great pictures, films. She was actually attached to direct and produce the F.A. Manley project, that we couldn't quite get it off the ground when she was still with us, but I think she's watching over us, and hopefully we're going to get this F.A. Manley project up and going here soon as well. And I'm just trying to create as much great entertainment outlets for people to not only educate them to what these great people did and accomplished, but also entertain them as well.
Our thanks to Byron Motley. Fantastic conversation. We love doing these kinds of episodes. Obviously, the closer we can get to first-person remembrances, the better. Of course, we're unfortunately not able to talk to Bob himself. He unfortunately passed away a couple of years back, although a tremendously long and varied and a tremendous life lived at 91 and change years. God bless. But we are thankful for Byron for telling us all about the process of putting this book together and the labor of love of a tremendous story, as you've heard. And I can't recommend it enough for you to go find a copy for yourself and enjoy it as much as I did. It's called, again, Ruling Over Monarchs, Giants, and Stars, True Tales of Breaking Barriers, Umpiring, Baseball Legends, and Wild Adventures in the Negro Leagues. It is co-authored by Messrs. Motley, that being Bob, the senior, and Byron, the junior. It is a fantastic book. You heard Byron mention you probably would best to be getting it in hardcover form. You will find a link to that hardcover version on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 131 with Byron, and you will see the link to that. We'll also send a link to you there as well, or you can go directly to get it in audiobook form, as you heard earlier, from Audible, our pals there, and you can go there at audibletrial.com/goodseats. Again, audibletrial.com/goodseats to sign up to get 1 free month of the Audible service, as well as a free audiobook download. When you sign up, you can cancel at any time. It's yours to keep, even if you cancel the service, as long as your device lives. And what a great way to burn up that free credit, courtesy of us, by listening to the audiobook version of this fine book by Messrs. Bob and Byron Motley. So there's no excuse not to get a version of this book. Hell, you can give it in Kindle form, why don't you? But you should definitely make it worth your time. You will enjoy it, again, as much, hopefully, maybe even more as I did. There you go, whatever. You know what I mean. You also know what I mean when I say thanks for checking out our website. Just generally, you'll find all of our old episodes there to stream or download. And again, that's goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can find our social media feeds on Twitter. We're at Good Seats Still. You can find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. You can find us on Facebook. There's a page devoted to us there. You can send us email from the website or just directly if you want to at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And hell, why not even sign up for our weekly newsletter? Why don't you be the first on your block before the hoi polloi to find out what's going to be dropping this coming week and all of our great episodes yet to come. So you can do all those fun things from the website there or directly as you may choose. And Byron, of course, is the Renaissance man. He's got so much entertainment stuff out there. He is a dynamic singer. He has backed up folks like Barry Manilow and Barbra Streisand and Dionne Warwick, of course, and Celine Dion. You can check out his music, his photography, and maybe even some tidbits about the films that we are eagerly awaiting on the history of the Negro Leagues and also the story of Effa Manley. All of that stuff and more can be found on his website at byronmotley.com. That's BYRON Motley, MOTLEY.com, byronmotley.com. I'm sure he'll be glad you did. And as we say goodbye to you, we're going to leave you with a cut from Byron's, I think it's 2008, if I'm not mistaken, album, Jazz and Cocktails. And I thought this was the probably the most appropriate song to send us out on. It's the cover of the great Woodrow Buddy Johnson and Count Basie composition and compilation from 1949. It's Byron's cover version of Did You See Jackie Robinson Hit That Ball? We leave you with this fine tune, finally done by Byron Motley, and we thank you for listening. And until next week, take care, everybody.
Jackie Robinson hit that ball. It went zooming across the left field wall.
Yeah, boy.
Oh, yes, yes. Jackie hit that ball. And when he swung his bat, the crowd went wild because he knocked that ball a solid mile.
Yeah, boy.
Oh, yeah. yes, Jackie hit that ball. Well, now Satchel Paige is mellow, so is Campanello, Newcomb and Dolby too. But it's a natural fact, when Jackie comes to bat, the other team is through. Now did you see Jackie Robinson hit that ball? I mean, he hit it, yeah, and that ain't all.
He's so home.
Oh, yes, yes, Jackie's sure enough gone. Sha-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-doo.
Of America changed.
When Frank Ricketts signed Jackie to that Major League contract, that was the beginning of the modern day civil rights movement.
All of a sudden, the whole black community discovered that they're now baseball fans.
Well, let me tell you now, before he made the majors, he was one of the players in the Negro Leagues. With Satchel Paige and Josh Double Duty and Cool Papa, must have been something to see. That's what my daddy told me, yeah. Now did you see Jackie Robinson hit that ball?
He really hit it.
Ooh, yeah, and that ain't all.
He's so home.
He's so home,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Jackie's sure enough gone.